right, Troy, we got a really neat question that's been asked of us today.
All right, let's have it.
It asks us, what is baptism for the dead from 1 Corinthians 15:29?
Oh, well, that is definitely a verse that needs repairing of understanding.
It does, because, when you think about like something of the dead, it starts bringing to mind all these things in the world, like in Mexico, the Day of the Dead.
Yeah, that's a very popular holiday. Everybody gets dressed up, kind of like Halloween, sort of.
Yeah, but in religious history, if you go back in Catholicism, it was the selling of indulgences that was generating revenue for the Catholic Church, and that was why Martin Luther and others had such a problem, because they would go around preaching that you could buy the forgiveness of sins for your dead relative, and they knew it would tug at the heartstrings. And there's these sermons, I've actually read some of them, but that were preached back then, that they were manipulating people from the emotionalism that certainly if you love your loved one, you would want them to be saved. And we have even experienced as preachers, when you're teaching someone the gospel, not only were they trying to apply it to themselves, wanting themselves to be saved, immediately their reaction goes to, but what about my father? What about my grandmother? What about my relative that's already passed? And it's a question we have to answer.
And it's a great question, and it's a legitimate question. But the problem is if you look at this passage, like we always say, you need to look at the context. You always got to look at the context. And if you look at the overall context of this passage, it's in the book of Corinthians. And in Corinth,
there were problems. and all throughout the book, what is he doing? Addressing the problems.
Exactly. I mean, chapter 1, there's division. Chapter 4, you've got issues. Chapter 5, you got sexual immorality. Chapter 7, you got marriage issues. You got them eating food that's given to idols. You've got lawsuits happening. And then you get to chapter 15, and he's dealing with this idea of the resurrection. And he comes to this passage. You should already be thinking this must be another problem that he's dealing with.
Exactly. Because the problem of the resurrection is something that just existed really in the New Testament church over and over again, because they just didn't get the concept of it. And so it allowed for some misteachings.
Exactly. And this idea of that they didn't get the concept is seen right there in the verse. In verse 29, he says, otherwise, what will they do who are baptized for the dead if the dead do not rise at all? Why then are they baptized for the dead? So this isn't Paul teaching some new doctrine about a special baptism. This is him helping the Christians there in Corinth understand something that they weren't getting right.
Exactly. And just to try and explain to them that there is a resurrection, and that they were inconsistent even with their own teachings in denying the resurrection.
Exactly. I mean, he's talking about, he's basically saying, well, wait a minute, if there's no resurrection for the dead, then why, if there's no resurrection, then why are they doing this for the dead?
Exactly. Just pointing out their inconsistency.
Exactly.
But as far as Paul's teachings emphasize the concept of one baptism by the one that understands, even his baptism alone. There was no appeal of have someone else be baptized for you. Acts 22:16, Ananias would say to them, why tarriest thou? Arise. The command was to him. And who had to do the baptizing? Or who had to be baptized? Paul did. And you go throughout all those examples that he has in all of his teachings from Romans 6:3-4, Galatians 3:26-28. Baptism is always done for the one that believes, for himself, for his salvation.
Amen.